Hi everyone, welcome to the demo on AWS API Gateway. And today we are going to demonstrate several versions of the same API. So I will start with the V1, version 1 of our API. It will have just one GET route to get the user details, and it will be supported by a Lambda function. Let's get started. So first of all, I need to go to the Lambda console here and create a new function. So I'm using the Node 20 runtime, and I'm going to leave the rest as default. So the logic here for the get user lambda function, it's going to be just dummy logic because in an actual get API, what you would do, you would go to a database and fetch user data and send a response to the user. But what I'm going to do, I'm just going to send a dummy response here. So it just says hello from get user. So I'm going to put the version here. So when we do the versioning, we can clearly see whether the response is coming from V1 or V2. So I have updated the Lambda function and I'm going to deploy it. Okay, it's successful. Then I need to go to the API Gateway console. So I'm going to create this API as user API. So I go to the create API, and because I want to do some authentication using API keys, and I want to experience some experiment with some throttling and quota limits, I'm going to use the REST API. Otherwise, I could have simply gone with HTTP API. To get those additional features, additional support for the API, I need to use the REST API. So I'm going to build one there. It's going to be a new API, so I will put user API here. We will use the regional as the default endpoint type. Now, here I'm going to use this user as the resource, but depending on your scenario, you may have several resources like user. If it is a student management system, there would be a student resource. There will be a course resource likewise. And here I'm going to create a get method. So I'm going to integrate with the Lambda function, and I can leave all the other fields as default. And I think that's all we need to do initially, and I'm going to deploy this API now with a version 1. So here stage is like a version of your API, or sometimes it could be used as an environment as well. So I'm going to create a new stage with the name V1. So here this is how we can call our API directly from a browser or from a curl command. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to copy this and try that on the browser. So I need to call user here to get the user's response. So here I got the response, hello from get user V1. So our first API is now working. Next, you can do the same request using a curl command. Let me show you how to do that. So this way we can see side by side how our API is responding to our curl commands in the terminal. So I'm going to run this curl command. So this is how we make a get request. So we get hello from get user V1. Now we are going to deploy the version 2 of our API. That is one good thing about AWS API Gateway. We can deploy multiple versions of the same API and give user different responses in each version. So what I'm going to do in the version 2 of the API, I'm going to give a different response to the user. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a new Lambda function for the v2. I'm going to leave the rest as default and create the function. And the code here, it will say v2. And I'm going to deploy the change I just did. So now I'm going to for this get method, I'm going to connect a different function. So I'm going to edit this, and instead of the get user lambda v1, I'm going to use the get user lambda. So okay, now we are calling the get user lambda. And so after we make a change, we need to deploy it as v2. But before that, I want to add another method here for the post route. So what I'm going to do, so in this v2 of our API, we will be serving two routes, one for get, one for post. So we have done the changes to the get route now. I'm going to add another route here for the post. So if I go to user level here, I can create a post method, post, and it will also have a Lambda function. So before I do that, I need to go and let me cancel this one. I want to go to the Lambda console and create the post function first. So what I will do, I will create another Lambda function here, post user Lambda. It will have the same Node.js runtime. I'm going to leave the rest as default and create the function. So as you may know, post functions, post methods in APIs, they are usually used to create or update resources in the database. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to create some dummy logic here, because reaching to the database and updating it's out of the scope. I'm going to focus on the API gateway service. When I focus on the lambdas, I will show you how to do a database update. But here, what I'm going to do, I'm going to read some data from the user who is making the request, like this username and email, and I'm going to send a message containing those two attributes back to the user. So I will extract the username and email from the user's request, and I will send a response to the user back using the same parameters, same attributes. So after the changes, I'm going to deploy it. Okay, now we can go and create the post method also. Should be a Lambda integration. So we should see here post user Lambda. So we have two routes now, get route and post route. And now we can deploy this API. And one other thing I want to do, I want to enforce API key required option for the post function. So only if you have a valid API key, then only you can make the post request and call the Lambda. So how we can do that? I go here and I go here, and in this place I put API key required and save. So API key is required. So how do we create an API key? That is the next thing I'm going to do. So here you go to API keys, and I'm going to create an API key here with the name user API key. So it will auto generate me an API key. If I want, I can do a custom one too. So API key is here. The next thing I want to do, I want to connect this API key with a usage plan that is connected to my API. So first of all, I will create a usage plan also here. So it will be user API usage plan. So I'm not going to specify any of these for now, but in the next version of my API, I'm going to specify some of these throttling and quotas. For now, I'm not going to enforce any of that. So I will remove this for now and create usage plan. Now here, we can add that API key to this usage plan. So add existing key, use API key and API key. Now whatever the API key is associated with this usage plan, and now we should be able to deploy this API to its version 2 and then see how the get responds to the version 2, post responds to version 2. So what I will do, I'm going to deploy this again. So I'm going to create a new stage here, v2. So one thing I want to show you, so this is the invoke URL for the version 2 of our API, and if you go to the version 1, it has a different invoke URL. So that way we can communicate with both our APIs and provide different responses to the user. So here, now what I will do, I will make the get request first. So here, v2 user. So after creating the usage plan, and we have the API key already here, what we need to do, we need to associate this usage plan with the stage that we just created as v2. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to add this user API and its v2 stage to this usage plan. Now this user API's v2 stage is being controlled by this usage plan. Now after associating the stage to our usage plan, we can go and make the post request. So this is the format of the post request, and we should be able to see hello from post create username John created with this email. So this is how we can use API keys to authenticate into our API. Let me show you one extra thing. So if we can also make a get request here, and it can have the header and the payload, but it doesn't matter. We are not going to consider that in the get request, but we can still call the get request from here. So you notice here, we are getting the v2 response because we call the v2 version of our API. But if we want, we can call the v1 as well. So it will hello from get user v1. So this way we can have multiple versions of the same API to give different responses to users. This is very helpful when you want to introduce a new feature with your latest API, and in case you want to direct your users to the old API, you can direct them to the v1 URL while experimenting with the v2. So that is the importance of versioning. Next, what we are going to do, we are going to incorporate limits into our API. So what we will need to do, we will update our usage plan. So what I'm going to do, I'm thinking of making a new usage plan to limit the user, so I can show you both version 2 and version 3. Let's see. So this will be user API usage plan v3. So this is for the version 3 stage. And throttling. So these are some of the limitations you can enforce. So how many requests per second your clients can call? Maybe 2 concurrent requests, maybe 2 here, and here you can limit how many requests your entire API can serve in a day. Let's make it 5 for now, so we can experience after 5 calls our API will not respond to the user. So we will create the usage plan, and it's okay, we can associate the same API key. So I will associate the same API key, so I don't need to change my curl command. And now I'm going to push another stage on this user API as v3 and associate that with the new usage plan. So we have the latest version v3, and I will go to the usage plans and associate this version 3 of the user API. Right. Now let me show you. So it will take some time for these changes to go into effect with regard to our API. So I will wait a couple of seconds before I start making the requests. So after I make 5 requests, it will expire, or it will exceed the limit, and it will not give me a valid response. Let's see. So I'm just going to make some GET requests with the version 3 of my API. Yeah, I will make a post request. It will be very clear. So I made 1 request already. So this is going to be my second request. Okay, there was some delay with the request, with the changes being applied. So I got, I think, 2 responses now. Here I will get a third one, fourth one, maybe the 5th one. Still the changes are going in, so it will take some time. So I believe after a couple more requests, I should see the limit exceeded response from my API. You see that it's now limit exceeded, so I cannot make any more calls to my version 3 of the API, but I can still continue to make calls to the version 2 of my API because it did not have those limits. I can make any number of calls to the version 2. It will give me unlimited number of responses. So these are the important things I wanted to show you in the API gateway. And one more thing, you can enable CloudWatch logs here. So by using this one, you can see whether there were calls made to your API, and you can see there are logs in the CloudWatch. So one other thing I want to do, I want to show you how to do some monitoring. So if you go to the dashboard, and if you see calls, how many calls we made on the version 3. So you can see here we have made 8 calls this time, and these are the latency metrics. So all of these, how many 400 errors, 500 errors, all those important metrics are here. You can check for each version here. For each version, how many responses, 400, 500, how much was the latency, and how many API calls. All those metrics are available here. And then one thing, so if you try to make, I want to do some change on the usage plan for this version 3. Instead of making it 5, I'm going to increase it to maybe 10. So that way I can show you something important. If I go to the post user Lambda, and from in the Lambda console also I can see how much invocations, how many times this Lambda was called, and how much time it took to execute this Lambda. So what I would do, I go to the CloudWatch logs for this Lambda, and you can see here. So this is the latest call. This is the latest event in this log stream. And if I continue to make v3 calls, it will show me logs in the API gateway, but not in the Lambda after that limit exceeds. So it confirms that it does not even go to the Lambda function if I have exceeded the limits. So let's see. It's still showing as limit exceeded. Maybe it will take some more time for that limit change I did to propagate to the API actually. So I'm getting responses now. So we should see some new logs here, and we should also be able to see the CloudWatch logs in the, let's see, go here. Yeah, it should be this one. This is our version 3, and here, let's see. So it logs all of this important information here. So I will continue to make new request, and I should see. So the latest log we have it is at 6:31, and if I update, we should see some updated events here. So after I run this, and let me check, show you one more thing. If I give a different API key, it should give me forbidden error. So if I change the API key, if I don't provide the correct API key, it will not process my request. So let's see, we will continue to make some requests and see. Yeah, now it's exceeded again. I increased the limit to 10. Now it passed that 10 limit as well. Now it's giving me again a limit exceeded errors. So here we should see more events. Let me see. Yeah, so there are new events here now. 6:33. Let's see. Status. So here 429. We can see the errors also. If you go to the API gateway, and here I think it is gateway responses. So this 429, it's where when its quota exceeded. So that's why we can see here method completed with status 429. So similarly, before there were, if you see the CloudWatch logs, you can clearly see there were after 6:33, until 6:33 there were logs here. So that means it made requests to the Lambda function, but after 6:33 it is denying the request from the API level, from the API gateway level. So the request don't go to the Lambda function. So that is the important thing I wanted to show you. It will still log the calls in the API gateway logs, but not in the Lambda logs. So here you can see there are new logs at 6:35, but there aren't any logs after 6:33 in the Lambda logs. So that is how and we can enforce API keys and the quotas and versioning, how we can do versioning or multiple versioning of the same API using the API gateway. So that wraps up the API gateway demo, and hope you enjoy the session, and see you in the next video.